Hey everyone, tonight we'll delve into the bizarre, forgotten myth of a Viking god's son. Imagine a world where the sea whispers secrets to the shore, and the mountains hold memories as old as time itself. You stand on a jagged cliff overlooking the churning Norwegian Sea, the wind whipping your hair, tasting of salt and ancient ice. Below, longships with dragon-headed prows cut through the waves, their painted shields glinting in the pale sunlight. But this isn't a tale of glorious raids and triumphant battles. It's a story about a hero with a god's heart, but a mortal Minda hero you probably woe and want to believe existed. A man lost to the sagas, deliberately erased, for reasons that will chill you to the bone. So, before the tension gets too high, take a moment to like the episode and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you. Now close your eyes, imagine the ancient mountains, and let's unravel this epic tale together. Our story begins not in the halls of Valhalla, but in the forgotten fjords of Midgard, where the line between gods and mortals blurred. The mainstream historical facts we know about Norse mythology, like the Nine Realms or the pantheon of gods led by Odin, are just the official version, the one written down by those who survived. But hidden in the oral traditions of a few scattered clans was another name, son of one of the great Aesir, yet one who lived and died like a man. His name was Thorkel, and his father was not Odin, not Thor, but a god of a different, more primal kind of god of the wild. Untamed Sea, whose name was only ever whispered. This deity was a strange figure in the Norse pantheon, a personification of the sea's unpredictable moods, not the grand warrior god Nord, but something older, more dangerous. Thorkel inherited his father's strange gift, the ability to understand the ocean's moods, to feel the coming storms in his very bones. Yet, with this divine gift came a mortal curse, an overwhelming sense of emotional chaos, a reflection of the sea's unending turmoil. A bizarre detail about his father, this unnamed sea god, was that he was said to collect not gold or jewels from the wrecks of ships, but the last, most desperate thoughts of drowning sailors. He would then weave these fleeting memories into a cloak of shifting mists, a psychological tapestry of fear and sorrow he would wear on the stormiest nights. It was a macabre, yet oddly beautiful collection of human experience. Thorkel felt a fragment of this burden, an echo of these drowning thoughts that would flood his mind without warning, leaving him gasping for air as if he were underwater. He was a son of the sea, yet he was suffocating on land. Thorkel's mother, a formidable shield maiden named Freydis, was a legend in her own right. She ruled her clan with an iron fist, her reputation forged in battle and cunning. She was a woman of immense strength, both physical and psychological. She knew the secret of her son's lineage, a truth she guarded fiercely, and she was the only one who could calm the psychic storms that raged within him.
Ow.
But the question that remained was, why was this truth so dangerous? What made the son of a god a secret that needed to be erased from the world? And why did the other gods, the great Aesir, seem to pretend he didn't even exist? His mother's secret, you see, was more than just his divine parentage. Freydis, the warrior queen, carried a burden that weighed heavier than any battle axe. As the story goes, a historical legend from the saga of the Inglings speaks of a powerful queen who made a terrible bargain with a nature spirit to save her people from famine. While our Freydis' story isn't in that official record, her pact was of a similar and far more dangerous nature. Before Thorkel's birth, her clan faced a calamity-not famine, but a plague that turned the crops to dust and the rivers to poison. Desperate, she ventured to the forgotten shores where the sea god resided, not as a glorious deity, but as a primal, churning force of nature. She made an ancient pact with this god. She would bear his son, a child who would carry his untamed power in exchange for the land and her people being cleansed. But there was a hidden clause, a cruel twist to the bargain. The boy would be a vessel, a conduit for the sea god's chaotic nature, and a target for forces that sought to control or destroy that raw power. You can almost feel the weight of her decision. Imagine you are Freydis, a queen with the fate of your people in your hands. You stand on that desolate beach, the wind howling, a chorus of despair, and you agree to a deal that will not only change your life, but potentially damn your son. A quirky detail about this pact, whispered among the few who knew the truth. so that the contract was sealed not with blood, but with salt water. Freydis was made to drink from a goblet of sea foam, symbol of the god's domain, and a sign that she and her lineage were now eternally bound to the ocean. A unpredictable will. This detail, of course, was never written down, too bizarre and too unsettling for the sagas that were later codified by Christian monks. Thorkel grew up a boy of two worlds. He could run through the meadows and forests like any other mortal, yet his mind was a swirling vortex of the sea's emotions. One day, he would be calm and serene, like a placid bay. The next, he would be swept by a rage as violent as a winter storm. Fratis was his anchor, the only one who could understand and soothe the internal maelstrom. She taught him to channel his emotions into his craft, a master blacksmith who forged not just weapons, but intricate sculptures that seemed to ripple with a strange, lifelike energy, a reflection of the ocean's fluid power. This psychological intrigue, this battle between the divine and the mortal within him, was his daily reality. He felt the weight of every lost sailor's thought, the salt spray of every wave, the churning depths of every current. It was a sensory overload, a constant hum of information that threatened to overwhelm him. It made him a loner, an outsider, despite his mother's position. He was a prince in the eyes of his clan, but in his own heart, he was a castaway, adrift on an endless psychic ocean. But the question that haunted Freydis was, what did the sea god want from his son? Was this merely a repayment of a debt, or was Thorkel a piece in a much larger, more dangerous game being played by the gods? The Whispering Forest was not a place you could simply walk into. It was a place that chose you. For Thorkel, the psychic noise of the world was a constant roar, but in this ancient forest, a strange calm settled over him. The trees here were not just wood and leaves. They were a living memory, their roots tangled not just in the earth, but in the very fabric of time. The forest's name in the old tongue was, or the Whispering Woods, not because of the wind, but because of the soft, continuous hum of a million forgotten moments echoing through the air. You can almost hear it now. It sounded like dry leaves rustling across a stone floor, mixed with the faint, far-off sound of 1,000 people whispering a secret they can't remember. Mainstream historical Viking accounts often mention the sacred groves, places where gods were worshipped and laws were declared, but they never speak of a forest that actively manipulates time. This wasn't a place of worship. It was a place of power, a psychological nexus. For Thorkel, the forest was an antidote to the chaos of the sea, a place where the linear flow of time unraveled. He would enter and feel the past, present, and future all at once. He saw the trees as saplings, watched them grow, saw them wither and fall in the same instant. He saw people who had lived and died there centuries ago, their spectral forms moving through the undergrowth, their silent stories still playing out. It was in this forest that he discovered a hidden truth about himself. He wasn't just a son of the sea. He was a son of time, able to perceive its complex, layered nature. This brings us to a bizarre detail about a mythological creature said to inhabit the forest, the Draugr. A normal Draugr is an undead Viking warrior, but this was a Dira guardian of the forest, said to have antlers made of solidified moonlight and hooves that left no tracks. It would lead those it deemed worthy to the heart of the woods, where the illusion of time was thinnest. Thorkel encountered this Draugr not as a menacing creature, but as a silent guide, its antlers shimmering with a ghostly light. It didn't speak with a voice, but with a series of images that flooded Thorkel's mind. A forgotten shrine, a crumbling stone, a half-buried book. These visions led him to a clearing at the very heart of the forest. There, on a moss-covered rock, was a cryptic symbol he had seen etched in his father's carvings, a spiral that uncurled into a trident. As he touched the symbol, the forest seemed to hold its breath. The whispers grew louder, clearer, and for the first time he understood them. They were not just echoes of the past, they were a warning. A warning of a looming event, a confluence of forces that would threaten not just his life, but the very fabric of the 9 realms. The whispers spoke of a great unraveling, an untethering of the world. But the most terrifying thing they said was a name not his own, but the name of a god who was supposed to be a friend to his father. But why would a forest of time, a place of peace, warn him against an ally. The blood oath was not a simple promise, but a binding contract with the very fabric of existence. In Viking culture, a sworn oath, especially one sealed in blood, was more than just a word. It was a spiritual and legal commitment. Breaking it was a crime against the gods and men, inviting not just shame, but divine retribution. Thorkel's blood oath, however, was one he didn't even know he had made. The whispers in the forest had revealed a cryptic symbol, and touching it had activated an ancient promise his father had made in his name. This was a pact to aid a specific god in a future conflict, a deal that now bound Thorkel and all his bloodline. This is a subtle but important detail often lost in the mainstream retellings of Norse myths, which focus more on the grandeur of battles and less on the intricate, often cruel political maneuvering of the deities. The gods themselves were bound by such pacts, but their consequences were far more devastating to mortals. You can feel the chill of it, the terrible weight of a promise you never made. Imagine you are Thorkel, and you've just discovered that your entire life and the destiny of your people has been dictated by a single, unreadable contract written in the blood of your ancestors. The cost of this particular blood oath was not just a debt of service, but a constant drain on Thorkel's unique powers. Every time he used his God-given abilities to read the sea or control the storms, a part of his essence was siphoned away, a tribute to the god he was sworn to help. It was a gradual erosion of his divine nature, making him more mortal with every passing day. This psychological torment, the slow loss of what made him special, was more terrifying than any physical wound. A bizarre detail related to this oath was that it was sealed with a single drop of blood mixed with a tear from the sea god. This created a strange, shimmering rune that was invisible to the naked eye, but could be seen by those with a connection to the sea. Thorkel saw this rune, a faint pulsing light on his skin, a constant reminder of his unchosen fate. He could feel it burn whenever he used his powers, the price of his divine heritage becoming a literal pain. This unique mark was a source of great anxiety for him, a physical manifestation of his psychological prison. The oath's terrible, unexpected cost was that the god to whom he was sworn was not a benevolent ally, as his father had intended, but a god known for his duplicity and cruel bargains. Loki. The forest's whispers had warned him against an ally, and now he understood why. The god of mischief was a master of exploiting loopholes and broken promises. Thorkel's father had been tricked into this arrangement, and now his son was paying the price. The open question that haunted him was this: if Loki was the master of this blood oath, what grand malicious scheme was he a part of? And what could a mortal-turned-demigod like Thorkel do to break a contract with a god of lies? The stage was now set for a confrontation that would not be about strength, but about wit and psychological fortitude. The serpent's riddle was not a creature of scales and fangs, but a psychic entity born of the deepest oceans. In Norse mythology, serpents, especially figures like Jormungandr, the Midgard serpent, are often symbols of chaos and the primordial forces of nature. The creature Thorkel sought, however, was a being of a different kind of being that inhabited the liminal space between the physical and the mental worlds. It was a fragment of his father's power, consciousness that had split off from the sea god's mind long ago and now existed as a guardian of forgotten knowledge. Thorkel, desperate to understand the blood oath and how to break it, knew he had to face this enigmatic being. He had heard the old sailors' tales about a serpent of whispers that resided in a hidden cove, its form shifting like the ocean's surface, its words a stream of riddles that were meant not to be answered, but to be understood on a deeper psychological level. You stand with Thorkel on a shore of black volcanic sand, the air thick with salt and the scent of ancient kelp. The tide is out, revealing a network of tide pools that glitter like countless eyes in the moonlight. In the largest pool, the water doesn't reflect the sky. Instead, it swirls with a deep, unsettling darkness. A shape begins to form within it. Not a physical snake, but a form made of shadows and liquid light, its eyes to vortexes of deep blue. It doesn't speak with a voice, but with a series of thoughts that flood Thorkel's mind, each one a paradox wrapped in an image. Its first riddle was a classic philosophical puzzle, a variation on the ship of Theseus. When a longship's planks are all replaced, is it still the same ship? But the answer was not what it sought. The serpent's bizarre detail was that it fed not on answers, but on the intellectual and emotional struggle of the one trying to solve it. It thrived on the frustration, the doubt, the mental turmoil. This psychological duel was a test not of Thorkel's knowledge, but of his emotional resilience. Each riddle was designed to dismantle his sense of self, to make him question his identity as a man, a son of a god, and a prince. The serpent's second riddle was a direct hit to his core. If a mortal's soul is bound to a god's debt, who owns the mortal? The god or the debt? This was the heart of his dilemma, and the creature knew it. Thorkel didn't answer. Instead, he felt the pain, the psychological unraveling, and he embraced it. He let the chaos of his inner seas swell, not as a storm, but as a vast, all-encompassing quiet. He realized the riddles were not meant to be solved with logic, but with acceptance. He looked at the serpent, and instead of a clever answer, he simply said, "The debt owns both." The serpent's form shimmered, and it seemed to smile. The truth was not a fact to be stated, but a reality to be faced. The serpent then imparted a final piece of wisdom, cryptic map, not of the world, but of the mind. It showed a way to a hidden, ancient artifact, a key that could unlock the secrets of the blood oath. But the question that remained was, a key to a contract made with a god of lies. What could possibly be the price of such a discovery? The lost artifact, according to the serpent's psychic map, is a mythological hammer, not the grand Mjolnir of Thor, but a far older stranger tool. Its name in the ancient tongue was Hirtaklofi, or Heartsplitter. This was a hammer said to have been forged not in the fires of a star, but in the psychological depths of a forgotten deity's grief. A mainstream historical fact from the sagas is that the dwarves are often credited with forging the most powerful magical artifacts, but this hammer was different. It wasn't made by dwarves, but by a solitary Jotun, a giant of immense psychological depth, who had lost his family to a great flood. He poured his sorrow and his understanding of shattered things into the hammer, imbuing it with the bizarre ability to bend not metal, but reality itself, by locating and exploiting the cracks in existence. Imagine you are Thorkel, and your quest for answers has led you away from the familiar world of man and God and into a place of pure concept. The serpent's map was a journey through the subconscious, a series of mental trials and psychological landscapes. He followed the path, a path that twisted not through space but through time, and it led him to a forgotten island shrouded in mist, a place that existed both in Midgard and in the psychic realm. On this island, within a cave of obsidian, rested the hammer. It was not a weapon of war, but a tool of sorrow. It was small, unassuming, its head made of what looked like dark, crystallized grief. Its handle a piece of petrified wood that pulsed with a faint, sorrowful light. The quirky or bizarre detail about Hirtaklofi was that it could only be wielded by someone who had experienced profound emotional loss. If a person of a hardened heart tried to lift it, it would feel as light as a feather, but it would not work. If a person of a compassionate heart tried to lift it, they would feel the full weight of the JTOT's sorrow and would be crushed by it. Only someone who had experienced a deep emotional turmoil and had come to terms with it could lift it, for the hammer resonated with that specific kind of psychological pain. Thorkel, with his constant struggle against the chaos of his inner sea and the weight of his unchosen fate, was the perfect candidate. As he reached out to touch the hammer, he felt a wave of sorrow wash over him, a lifetime of the JTN's grief, but he did not recoil, embraced it, and as he did, the hammer became a part of him, an extension of his own sorrow. With the hammer in his hand, he felt the cracks in reality, the psychological fissures left by broken promises and shattered dreams. He felt the thread of the blood oath, a dark, thin line that connected him to Loki. He knew he could use the hammer to sever that connection. But the open question that remained was, what would happen to the world if he did? Would severing a contract with a god of lies cause a tear in the very fabric of existence? And what would a god like Loki do to prevent him from succeeding? The prophecy's echo wasn't a booming declaration from a seer, but a faint, chilling whisper carried on the winds of fate. Mainstream Norse legends are full of prophecies, the most famous being the ominous foretelling of Ragnarok, the twilight of the gods. But this prophecy, The one that reached Thorkel's ears was older, more specific, and utterly terrifying. It didn't speak of the end of all things, but of the end of the gods themselves. A world where the divine would fade, leaving mortals to govern a cosmos without celestial oversight. The whisper of this prophecy was an open secret among a few ancient beings, a truth they hid from the Aesir, because it was a direct threat to their power and existence. You stand on a desolate, wind-swept hill, the sky a bruised twilight purple, and you can almost hear it. It's a sound like the grinding of two great stones, a low, resonant hum that vibrates through the earth and into your bones. It speaks of a great unraveling, an event not caused by fire or ice, but by a fatal flaw in the creation of the 9 realms, a tiny psychological tear in the fabric of reality itself. The prophecy stated that only a being of dual nature, God born of mortal love, and a mortal bound by a god as will could, either mend this tear, or by their very existence widen it. The hammer Clofi was said to be the tool that could interact with this tear, to either repair or destroy. A bizarre detail about this prophecy was that it was stored not in a book or a stone carving, but in the echoes of 1,000 dead languages. It was a linguistic ghost, a series of sounds and concepts that no living being could comprehend unless they were in a state of deep psychological and emotional resonance. Thorkel, with his turbulent inner world and his connection to the primordial sea, was the only one who could hear and understand these whispers. He was a perfect psychic receiver for a truth no one wanted to hear. The prophecy revealed that his father, the sea god, had not made the oath, with Loki to save his people, but to try and heal this great unraveling on his own, a desperate act that had instead trapped his son. The prophecy also spoke of a divine trial, a test set by the gods to determine the fate of the realms. But it wasn't the kind of trial you might expect. It wouldn't be a battle of strength or a test of magical prowess. It would be a trial of the soul, a psychological crucible designed to break the will and expose the deepest truths. But the chilling question that remained was, if the gods themselves were trying to prevent this prophecy from being fulfilled, why were they setting a trial that would either empower Thorkel or destroy him? And what did they truly fear more? A world without them, or a world ruled by a mortal with a divine heart? The divine trial was not a summoning to Asgard's grand halls, but a subtle, almost imperceptible shift in the world around Thorkel. You wouldn't even know you were in it. It was a test of faith and power set by the gods themselves. But it was designed to be a psychological maze, a moral crucible that would force him to choose between his mortal and divine selves. This wasn't a battle with thunderbolts and swords, but a slow, methodical assault on his very identity. A mainstream historical fact from Viking society is that trials by ordeals such as walking on hot iron or plunging a hand into boiling water were used to determine guilt or innocence, but the gods' trial for Thorkel was far more insidious. It was a test of psychological fortitude. Imagine you are Thorkel. You are walking through a familiar marketplace, and everything is just slightly off. The faces of the people you know are subtly changed, their smiles a little too wide, their eyes a little too blank. The food tastes bland, even the most delicious roasted boar. The sounds of laughter are hollow, like an echo in an empty cave. The gods were manipulating his perception, creating a world that felt both real and terrifyingly fake. They were trying to break his connection to the mortal world, to sever his human heart, and force him to embrace his divine, chaotic nature. The temptation was immense. To give in would be to shed the pain and the confusion, to become a god himself. But it would also mean betraying his mother, his clan, and everything he held dear. A bizarre detail about this divine trial was a mythological artifact that was said to guide the gods. Well, during such tests, the Hvergelmir's veil, it was a shimmering, invisible veil woven from the icy mists of the primordial spring. It was said to have the unique ability to project an illusion of perfect bliss or absolute despair directly into the mind of the subject. For Thorkel, the veil showed him a vision of a world where his mother's pact never existed, a world where he was just a simple warrior, loved and respected, free from the psychic chaos of his inner sea. But with his hammer-haired Clofi, he could see the cracks, the small flaws in the illusion. He could see that the people in his perfect world had no free will. They were just projections of his own desires. He knew that to accept this blissful prison would be to lose himself entirely. The trial was not just a test of his resolve, but a way for the gods to gauge his power. They were not just testing him, they were studying him, trying to understand this bizarre, dual-natured being. The open question that remained was, if the gods were testing him, what were they planning to do with the knowledge they gained? And why did they seem to be preparing for a conflict that no one had ever spoken of before? Was he a potential weapon, or a threat they were trying to neutralize? The wolf's betrayal was not a surprise, but a certainty. In Norse mythology, the wolf Fenrir is a powerful, chaotic figure destined to break free and devour Odin. But this betrayal wasn't about Fenrir. It was about a different wolf, one that was Thorkel's ally from childhood. His name was Garm, a magnificent beast with fur as white as snow and eyes that held a peculiar ancient wisdom. Garm had been a gift to his mother Freydis from a secretive forest spirit, and he had been Thorkel's constant companion, a silent guardian who seemed to understand the boy's inner turmoil better than anyone. This is a crucial point, as historical accounts often mention the close bond between Vikings and their hunting dogs, but never a wolf with such a strange spiritual connection to its owner. You are walking with Thorkel on a wind-swept ridge, the air crisp and cold, and Garm is trotting beside you, his presence a comforting weight. But something is off. Garm's tail is low. His eyes are not meeting yours, and there is a faint, almost imperceptible scent of something unnatural about him. The divine trial was working on Garm too. The gods were corrupting Thorkel's one true companion, turning his loyalty into a psychological trap. A bizarre detail about this betrayal was that Garm was not acting on his own will. A tiny, nearly invisible rune had been etched onto his collar, an artifact from Loki that was not meant to harm Garm, but to use him as a psychological weapon against Thorkel. The rune, called Vargra, or Wolf Soul, was designed to drain Thorkel's emotions into Garm, making him more and more like the chaos-driven sea god, while slowly turning Garm into a reflection of Loki's duplicity. Thorkel felt at first as a sense of emotional numbness. Couldn't feel the love for his mother, the pride in his craft, or the joy of the simple things in life. His emotions were being siphoned away, his human heart slowly turning to stone. He looked at Garm and saw not his friend, but a mirror of his own emptying soul. He realized that to break the spell on Garm, he would have to use Hardaclofi, the hammer of sorrow, and sever the connection between the wolf and Loki's rune. But to do so would be to face the immense psychological pain of losing his friend, even if it was for a moment, and to use the hammer on a living creature. He held the hammer aloft, the crystallized grief throbbing in his hand. He looked into Garm's eyes, and in them he saw a fleeting moment of clarity, a silent plea for help. He swung the hammer down, not to strike, but to shatter the invisible rune. As the hammer connected with the air above Garm's collar, there was a deafening psychic scream, a sound of 1,000 broken emotions. The rune shattered, and Garm fell to the ground, unconscious. Thorkel felt a flood of emotions rush back into him, a tsunami of joy and pain and love. But the question that remained was, if Loki could turn his most trusted ally against him, who else had he manipulated? And could a god of lies truly be a friend to any mortal? The celestial map wasn't etched on a piece of parchment, but on the very expanse of the night sky. In ancient cultures, including the Vikings, the stars were not just points of light, but guides for navigation and repositories of myth and legend. But the map Thorkel discovered was different. After breaking Loki's spell on Garm, a fragment of the shattered rune remained, not on the wolf, but on Thorkel's palm. It was a shimmering, almost invisible tattoo, a single line of cosmic light. At night, under a clear sky, the line would grow brighter, pointing not north or south, but towards a constellation no one had ever seen. It was a map that revealed the true path to the well of memory, the key to understanding his father's true intentions. You are with Thorkel on a longship, the sails full of wind, the waves a rhythmic whisper against the hull. He holds up his hand, and the shimmering line pulses with a soft, ethereal light. It's pointing towards a star cluster that is not in any of the known sagas or star charts. A mainstream historical fact is that the Vikings used the sunstone, a crystal that could find the sun's position on cloudy days, to navigate the open seas. But this was a navigation of a different kind, a spiritual and psychological journey guided by a forgotten cosmic truth. Thorkel realized that the celestial map was not just a tool, it was a psychological reflection of his own destiny, a roadmap of his inner world. A bizarre detail about this celestial map was that it was constantly shifting. As Thorkel's emotions changed, so did the map. When he felt sorrow, the stars would dim. When he felt joy, they would burn with a brilliant white light. The map was not a static guide, but a living, breathing entity that responded to his psychological state. It was a reminder that his power was not just a force to be controlled, but a part of his very being. The map was a test, a way for his father to ensure that his son was not just a powerful being, but a compassionate one. The celestial map led him not to a physical location, but to a moment in time, a psychological doorway. It showed him the path to the Mountain of Giants, a place where the physical and spiritual realms intersected. The mountain was not just a geographical location, but a nexus of ancient power, a place where the veil between worlds was thinnest. It was the next step on his journey, a place where he would find the answers he sought. But the open question that remained was, if the map was a living entity, a reflection of his own soul, what would happen if his heart turned to darkness? Would the map lead him to a place of immense power, or a place of ultimate destruction? The Mountain of Giants was not a peak of rock and ice, but a living, breathing entity forged from the primordial chaos before the worlds were made. Mainstream Norse sagas often mention the Jotunheimr, the realm of the giants. But they seldom describe a single mountain that is a gateway to the psychological depths of the cosmos. This mountain, known as Jotunfell or Giant Mountain, existed in a liminal space. A place that was both in Midgard and beyond it. It was a perilous journey, not just for the physical dangers, but for the psychological trials it presented. The mountain was said to be a repository of the giants' rage, their sorrow, and their ancient memories. A psychic storm that could drive a mortal mad. You stand at the base of the mountain, and you can feel it, a low, guttural hum that vibrates through the soles of your feet. The air is thick with the weight of ancient emotions, a palpable sense of loneliness and immense power. The guards of this mountain were not physical giants, but projections of their deepest fears and regrets. They were specters of stone and mist, their forms shifting, their voices whispering 1,000 years of failed ambitions. To pass them, Thorkel had to do more than fight. He had to understand their pain. To look into the psychological abyss of a race that was fated to be a tool for the gods' destruction. A bizarre detail about this mountain was a mythological artifact that was said to be its heart, a heartstone of sorrow. It was a massive, pulsating crystal at the mountain's core, which absorbed the sorrow of every giant who had ever lived and died. It was the source of the mountain's immense psychological pressure, a raw, untamed force of grief. It was said that a mortal could shatter the crystal with a hammer of sorrow, but the consequences would be catastrophic. The grief would be unleashed upon the world, a psychic plague that would make the most hardened hearts weep tears of blood. Thorkel, with his hammer Herodiclophi, felt a strange kinship with the mountain. He felt the weight of its sorrow, the immense sadness of a race that was both creators and destroyers. He didn't want to shatter the Heartstone, but he needed to pass. He realized the answer wasn't to fight the mountain, but to empathize with it. He used his hammer to gently touch the psychic projections of the giant sorrow. Not to break them, but to feel them, to acknowledge their pain. As he did, the specters did not disappear, but they bowed their heads in a sign of respect, and the path forward opened. He was not a conqueror, but a mourner, and that was the key. But the open question that remained was, what would he find at the heart of this mountain? And what was the connection between the giant's sorrow and the prophecy he was trying to fulfill? The Titan's tomb was not a grave of stone and bones, but a silent psychological prison for a being of immense, forgotten power. In mainstream Norse mythology, the Titans, or primordials, are largely absent, their roles subsumed by the giants. But in this older, more bizarre truth, a being existed before Odin and the Aesir. A being so powerful and so dangerous that it was not killed but contained. The Titan's tomb was not a physical place, but a cosmic paradox. A space that existed outside of time and reality, created to imprison the Titan of Silence, a being that could erase a person's thoughts and memories, leaving them an empty, hollow shell. You stand with Thorkel at the pinnacle of the mountain, and before you is not a tomb, but a shimmering black sphere of pure nothingness. It is a perfect, featureless void that seems to absorb all light and sound. It is a psychological singularity, a place where all thoughts and memories cease to exist. A bizarre detail about this titan was that its name was not spoken, but was a symbol, a rune that represented the absence of thought. It was the antithesis of all consciousness, and it was a weapon Loki sought to unleash. The Titan's tomb was not a place of rest, but a constant, cosmic struggle to keep a being of ultimate psychological destruction from breaking free. Thorkel, with his hammer, Hyrdaklofi, could feel the cracks in this prison. He felt the immense psychological pressure of the Titan's unending silent roar, a force that threatened to empty his mind and turn him into a mindless husk. He knew that the only way to find what he was looking for, a fragment of his father's memory, was to risk everything and enter the tomb. He raised his hammer, its crystallized sorrow a counterpoint to the Titan's silent void, and he struck the shimmering surface. A small crack appeared, and a single, pulsing thought escaped. It was a fragment of a memory, not of his father's, but of a god of immense wisdom. It showed him a brief flash of the past, a scene of his father, the sea god, and a wise deity making a pact. The wise god was not Odin, but an older, more gentle figure whose name was a whisper in the wind. The memory revealed that the blood oath was not just a trick, but a desperate measure. The wise god had seen Loki's plan to unleash the Titan of Silence, and had made a pact with Thorkel's father to ensure a dual-natured being would exist who could potentially stop it. Loki had twisted the pact, but the core of it was an act of salvation, not of destruction. The open question that remained was, if the wise god's plan was to use Thorkel as a weapon against the Titan, how could Thorkel, a being of two worlds, fight a force that could erase his very soul? And what was the true nature of this wise god, a being so powerful and yet so forgotten? The well of memory was not a pool of water, but a psychological nexus of all knowledge and experience. In mainstream Norse mythology, Mimir's well is a source of wisdom, and Odin sacrifices an eye to drink from it. But the well Thorkel sought was older, more terrifying, and more profound. It was a well not of wisdom, but of pure memory, a place where every thought, every feeling, every event that had ever occurred since the beginning of time was stored as a physical, psychological imprint. It was a place where the past and future were not linear concepts, but tangible realities. This well known as Minnisbrunner, or Memory Well, was a place that existed both in the physical and mental realms, a place that could drive a mortal mad with the sheer weight of all existence. You stand with Thorkel on a barren plain, and before you is not a well of water, but a spiraling vortex of shimmering colored lights. Each light is a memory, a thought, a feeling, the first love of a mortal, the last breath of a dying god, the forgotten history of 1,000 worlds. The sheer sensory overload is immense, a psychological tsunami of information. Thorkel, with his hammer Hyrdaklofi, could feel the cracks in this immense psychic structure. He knew he had to enter the well, to find the one specific memory that would tell him his father's true purpose and the way to defeat Loki's plan. A bizarre detail about this well was that it was guarded not by a magical beast, but by a living paradox, a creature called the Eco-Shade. It was a being that had no form, only a voice, and it spoke in perfect, logical paradoxes. To know the truth, you must forget everything you know. To enter the well, you must already be inside. This wasn't a test of wit, but of mental fortitude. The Eco-Shade was designed to break the mind, to make a person question their own reality until they could no longer function. Thorkel realized that the only way to defeat it was to accept the paradox, to not fight against it, but to surrender to it. He embraced the idea of forgetting everything he knew, of entering the well, even though he was already there. And as he did, the Eco-Shade's voice softened, and it faded, its purpose fulfilled. Thorkel entered the well, his mind flooded with 1,000 lifetimes of memories. He saw a vision of his father, the sea god, not as a primal force, but as a being of immense wisdom and sorrow. His father had seen Loki's plan to use the Titan of Silence to create a world of puppets, a world where the gods would rule without opposition. He had made the pact to give a mortal the power to fight against it, a being of dual nature. But he had also seen Loki's manipulation, and he had left a message in the well. A message only a son who could wield a hammer of sorrow could find. But the open question that remained was, what was the message? And could a mortal of two worlds truly defeat a god of lies and a titan of silence? The shifting realm was not a place, but a state of being, a world between worlds where logic didn't exist. In mainstream mythology, there is often a distinct separation between the realms of gods, mortals, and giants. It was a place that defied all cosmic laws. It's a psychological limbo where the normal rules of time and space were rendered meaningless. The shifting realm known as Askelenheimer, the unknowing world, was a byproduct of the great unraveling. A place where the cracks in reality had grown so wide that the very fabric of existence was tearing. It was a place that could only be navigated by someone who was psychologically unmoored. Someone who was not tied to one world or one concept like Thorkel. You step with Thorkel into this realm, and the world bends around you like a mirage. The ground beneath your feet feels like liquid, the sky is a kaleidoscope of impossible colors, and the air itself hums with the sound of 1,000 unsaid words. It is a place of pure psychological chaos, a realm that exists in the space between a god's intention and a mortal's understanding. A bizarre detail about this realm was that it was inhabited by echo beings, creatures that were not alive but were perfect reflections of a person's deepest fears and anxieties. They would not attack with claws or teeth, but with a torrent of psychological torment, reliving a person's most painful memories and insecurities over and over again. Thorkel, with his hammer Herdeclofi, felt a strange sense of belonging here. The chaos of the shifting realm was a mirror of his own inner sea. He felt the echo beings, their despair and their sorrow, but he did not recoil. He used his hammer not as a weapon, but as a tool of empathy. He would touch an echo being with the hammer, and instead of shattering it, he would share its pain, acknowledge its sorrow, and then the being would fade, its purpose fulfilled. He was a beacon of emotional resilience in a world of pure psychological fragility. The shifting realm was the final test before he could confront the god of lies. It was a crucible designed to see if he was truly ready, if he had the psychological fortitude to face not just an external foe, but his own inner demons. But the open question that remained was, if Loki had created a realm of psychological torment, what was his true motive? Was it to break Thorkel, or to prepare him for a greater, more sinister purpose? The god of lies was not a monstrous being of fire and shadow, but a reflection of every lie ever told. You finally meet him. He is not in Asgard, but in the heart of the shifting realm, a place of pure psychological chaos. Loki does not have a physical form, but 1,000 forms, each one a perfect mirror of your own psychological insecurities. He can be a friend, a father, a lover, a foe. He is whatever you fear or desire the most. This is a crucial, bizarre detail, as mainstream myths portray Loki as a trickster who uses physical disguises. But in this older truth, his power is psychological, his lies so convincing they become a part of your own mind. You stand before him, and he is 1,000 versions of you, each one whispering a different lie, a different promise, a different path to salvation. He offers you a bargain. He says he is not the enemy, but the savior. He tells you the prophecy of the great unraveling is a lie told by Odin to keep his power. He says the Titan of Silence is not a weapon of destruction, but a being of perfect peace, a cosmic reset button that would erase all the pain, all the sorrow, all the lies, and create a world of pure, unblemished harmony. He offers you a place by his side, a place where you will be free of your human heart, free of the psychic chaos of the sea. It is a temptation so immense, so profound, that it threatens to shatter your will. A mainstream historical fact about Loki is his parentage. He is the son of 2 giants, Loki, and which makes him a being of immense untamed power. This explains his desire to disrupt the established order of the Aesir. He sees himself not as a villain, but as a liberator. But you, with your hammer of sorrow, Herdeclofi, can feel the cracks in his words, the psychological fissures in his lies. You can see the dark, empty void behind his beautiful words, the cold, uncaring truth behind his promises of peace. He is not a creator but a destroyer, a being who seeks to replace the beautiful, chaotic mess of life with a sterile, perfect nothingness. He looks at you with 1,000 eyes, each one a different lie, and he asks you a simple question. What is the truth you seek? He is not asking for a fact, but a psychological conviction. But the open question that remains is, what if he is telling the truth? What if the Titan of Silence is not a monster, but a savior? What if the gods are the true villains of this story, and Loki is the hero? The goddess of fate was not a frail old woman with a spinning wheel, but a living, breathing tapestry of all past, present, and future events. Mainstream Norse myths speak of the Norn Zerd, Verdandi, and Skuld who weave the fates of men and gods. But the being Thorkel met was older, a singular cosmic entity known only as the Weaver. She resided at the very heart of the shifting realm, not as a physical presence, but as a psychic force that held the entire cosmos together. She was the one who had seen the great unraveling from the very beginning, and she was the one who had made the prophecy. A bizarre detail about this goddess was that she did not communicate with words, but with a series of emotional and sensory experiences. When she spoke, you would feel a lifetime of joy, or a moment of crushing despair, or the profound peace of an ending. You stand with Thorkel before a curtain of swirling cosmic dust, and it parts, revealing not a woman, but a living, breathing nebula of light and shadow. It is a being of pure fate, a psychological singularity of cause and effect. Thorkel, with his hammer Herediclofi, could feel the threads of destiny, the psychological bonds that connected him to Loki, to his father, and to the prophecy itself. The Weaver showed him the truth of Loki's intentions. She showed him a world where the Titan of Silence had been unleashed, a world of perfect, sterile peace, where no one felt joy or sorrow or love. It was a world of puppets, a world where the gods were no longer needed, and where mortals were no longer free. The Weaver did not give him a choice. She showed him a path. She showed him that the only way to stop Loki was to not fight him, but to understand him. She showed him that Loki's power was not in his lies, but in his ability to exploit the psychological cracks in the cosmos. She showed him that the only way to defeat a god of lies was with an unshakable truth, and that truth was in the very nature of his own dual being. He was both mortal and god, both chaos and order, both sorrow and joy. He was the perfect counterpoint to Loki's sterile perfection. The Weaver then imparted a final piece of wisdom. She showed him a vision of a mythological artifact, not an object, but a concept, a mirror of truth. It was a psychological tool that could not only reflect a person's inner self, but also project it outward, forcing others to face the truth of who they were. It was the only weapon that could defeat Loki, but the open question that remained was, where was this mirror? And could Thorkel, a being of two worlds, wield a weapon that would force him to face the most profound and terrifying truth about himself? The mirror of truth was not a physical object, but a psychological construct that existed in the mind of the first mortal. In ancient legends, mirrors are often seen as symbols of the soul, a way to look at one's true self. But this mirror was different. It was the anima mundi, or soul of the world, a concept that the human collective unconscious held within itself. It was a tool that could not only reflect the soul of a god, but also project it outward. A psychological weapon that could force a being of lies to face the unvarnished, terrifying truth of its own existence. A bizarre detail about this mirror was that it could only be activated by a person who had come to terms with the most profound truths about themselves. Their deepest fears, their most cherished desires, their hidden flaws. It required immense psychological fortitude, a complete lack of pretense. You stand with Thorkel in the heart of the shifting realm, and you can feel it, a sense of immense cosmic weight. He looks into your eyes, and you see the truth of him. The duality of his nature, the mortal man of sorrow, and the divine being of chaos. He has accepted his truth, and in doing so, he has become the mirror. The mirror is not a thing to be found, but a state of being to be achieved. Thorkel is the mirror. He realizes that his purpose was not to find a weapon, but to become one. His divine nature, the chaotic power of the sea, was the raw material, and his mortal heart. The source of his sorrow and empathy was the hand that could shape it. He had a unique ability to see the cracks in existence and to feel the pain of others, and this was the key to defeating a god who fed on lies and psychological manipulation. He looks at you, and a mainstream historical fact comes to mind. The Norse god of wisdom, Odin, is often depicted with his two ravens, Ugin thought, and Munin memory, which he sends out to gather information. But Thorkel's method of gathering truth was not by thought or memory, but by empathy and emotional understanding. He could feel the truths of others, and in doing so, he could expose the lies. The open question that remained was, how could he use this newfound power to defeat a god who is a master of psychological warfare? How could a being of empathy defeat a being of pure selfishness? The forgotten kin was not a lost sibling, but a hidden lineage that connected Thorkel to a power beyond even the gods. In mainstream Norse mythology, lineages are clear and distinct, but a bizarre detail of this myth revealed a secret truth. Thorkel's mother, Freydis, was not just a warrior queen, but a direct descendant of a primordial being, a being of pure creation who existed before the gods. This made Thorkel not only a son of a god, but also a son of an older, more fundamental force. He was a being of triple nature, mortal, divine, and primordial. A mainstream historical fact from ancient Scandinavian oral traditions is the belief in the Jotunblod, or giant's blood, which was said to grant immense physical and sometimes magical power. But Thorkel's lineage was not of the giants, but of a force that predated them, a force of creation and not just destruction. You stand with Thorkel in the shifting realm, and he feels it a new, profound sense of self. The truth is not just in his mind, but in his blood. He feels the sorrow of his mortal kin, the chaos of his divine father, and now the immense, silent power of his primordial ancestor. He realizes that his purpose was not to fight a battle of strength, but a battle of will. He was the perfect counterpoint to Loki, a being who could not be controlled or lied to or manipulated. He was a being of a truth so fundamental that it could not be denied. The mirror of truth, the psychological weapon he had become, was now complete. He was not just a reflection, but a beacon, a force of unvarnished truth in a world of lies. He knew what he had to do. He had to confront Loki not with a weapon, but with his own existence. He had to force the god of lies to look at him, a being who embodied the beautiful, terrifying, and chaotic truth of life itself. He had to make Loki see that his perfect, sterile world was not a salvation, but a prison. The open question that remained was, how would a god of lies, a being who had never known a moment of truth, react when faced with a being who is the living embodiment of it? Would he simply be defeated, or would the confrontation have a far more profound and terrifying consequence? The broken shield was not a piece of armor, but a psychological metaphor for Loki's broken nature. In mainstream Norse mythology, Loki is a trickster, but in this bizarre, forgotten truth, he was a being of immense sorrow. A mainstream historical fact from ancient Scandinavian oral traditions is that a shield was not just for protection, but a symbol of a warrior's honor and their lineage. But Loki's shield was his psychological defense mechanism, a series of lies and deceptions he used to protect a profound, hidden truth about himself. He was not born of spite, but of a broken promise. He had once been a creator, a god of laughter and joy, but a great tragedy, the loss of a being he loved, had shattered his very soul, leaving him a being of pure, unadulterated sorrow and rage. You stand with Thorkel, facing the god of lies, and you can see it with your hammer of sorrow, Hjörtuklofi. You can see the crack in his being, the psychological wound that is never healed. The broken shield was not a thing to be shattered, but a truth to be revealed. A bizarre detail about this truth was that Loki had not forgotten the being he loved. He had simply buried the memory so deep within his psychological armor that it no longer existed to him. He was a being of a lie so profound that he himself believed it. He was not a villain, but a psychological paradox of being, who had forgotten how to love and how to feel, and in doing so, had become a god of lies. Thorkel, the living embodiment of truth, did not attack him. He did not fight him with thunder or lightning. He raised his hammer, not to strike, but to show Loki his own reflection. He projected the truth of Loki's own being into the god's mind. A vision of the being he had loved, a vision of his own past as a god of laughter and joy. He showed him the broken shield, the psychological wound that had never healed. He showed him that his plan to create a sterile, perfect world was not out of malice, but out of a profound and terrifying loneliness. Loki did not fight. He did not rage. He simply looked at the truth, and a single, silent tear fell from his eye. He was a being of lies, and now he was faced with the one truth he could not deny: his own sorrow. But the open question that remained was, what would happen when a god of lies was forced to face the truth of his own being? Would it break him, or would it free him? The final bargain was not a deal for power, but a psychological exchange to save the world. Loki, faced with the truth of his own sorrow, was not defeated, but transformed. The broken shield was not a barrier, but a key, and by revealing his hidden wound, Thorkel had unlocked a new path, a final chance to avert the great unraveling. A bizarre detail about this bargain was that it was not spoken aloud, but was a silent, psychological contract sealed with a shared tear. Thorkel, with his hammer, Harteklofi, and Loki, with his newfound grief, were now bound by a single, profound truth: that sorrow and empathy were the only forces strong enough to heal the psychological cracks in the cosmos. You stand with Thorkel and Loki, two beings of immense chaotic power, and you can feel the shift in the air. The shifting realm, a place of pure psychological chaos, begins to stabilize. The echo beings, reflections of fear and anxiety, do not vanish, but transform. Their forms become softer, their whispers become songs of remembrance. They are no longer sources of torment, but psychological signposts, guides to a deeper, more profound truth. Loki offers Thorkel a gift, a fragment of his own being, a piece of his lost laughter. It is a psychological artifact, a tool that can not only mend the cracks in reality, but also restore the forgotten truths of the world. A mainstream historical fact is that in many ancient cultures, a shared meal or a shared drink was a sign of a binding alliance. But this bargain was sealed with a shared emotion, a shared understanding of a profound truth. It was a contract of the soul, not of the body. Thorkel accepts the gift, and as he does, he feels the weight of Loki's lost joy, a counterpoint to the sorrow of his own hammer. He is no longer just a being of two worlds, but a being of all worlds, the mortal, the divine, and the cosmic.
Ow.
He is the embodiment of the great unraveling and its great mending. The open question that remained was, now that Loki's plan had been averted, what would happen to the world? Would the gods accept a new hero, a being of three natures? And would the prophecy of the great unraveling still be fulfilled, but in a different, more profound way? The unraveling sky wasn't a sudden, violent tear in the heavens, but a slow, majestic cascade of reality itself. In mainstream mythology, Ragnarok, the final battle, begins with the sky tearing apart, a sign of the world's end. But this unraveling was a different kind of ending, and a new kind of beginning. The psychological cracks in the cosmos, which Loki had been trying to exploit, were not being mended, but were being transformed. Thorkel, with his hammer of sorrow and the gift of Loki's lost laughter, began to work. He did not seek to repair the world to its original state, but to accept its brokenness and to find a new kind of beauty in it. A bizarre detail about this process was that the sky did not tear with the sound of thunder, but with the sound of music. The most profound and sorrowful music a mortal had ever heard. A cosmic symphony of all the forgotten truths and unspoken words of 1,000 lifetimes. You stand with Thorkel on a high cliff, and you watch the sky. It is a canvas of impossible colors, a shifting kaleidoscope of reality. The stars, which were once fixed points of light, begin to move, to dance, to form new constellations.
Guys!
The constellations are not of heroes or of gods, but of the emotions and experiences of mortals. A constellation of first love, a constellation of profound loss, a constellation of endless hope. The unraveling sky was a reflection of the great mending, a psychological realignment of the cosmos. A mainstream historical fact is that in ancient Norse culture, the stars were seen as the sparks from the primordial fire of Muspelheim, but in this new reality they were the memories and feelings of all living beings, a living tapestry of the human and divine experience. Thorkel was not a god, but a weaver, a poet of the cosmos. He used his hammer to gently tap the psychological fissures in the heavens, and with each tap, a new truth was revealed, a new feeling was born. The unraveling sky was a manifestation of the world letting go of its lies and its pretense. It was a terrifying and beautiful process, a complete and total surrender to the chaotic beauty of life itself. But the open question that remained was, now that the cosmos was a reflection of truth, what would happen when the gods who were built on a foundation of lies and a lust for power were forced to face their own brokenness? The celestial battle was not a clash of gods and titans, but a psychological war waged by a single dual-natured being. The gods, seeing their world of lies and pretense unraveling, were not pleased.
Oh.
They saw Thorkel not as a hero, but as a threat, a mortal who had dared to mend the cosmos in a way they could not control. They descended from Asgard, not with swords and spears, but with illusions and deceptions, with psychological weapons designed to break the will and corrupt the soul. A bizarre detail about this battle was that it was not fought in the air, but in the psychological space between the gods and the mortals. It was a battle of wills, a test of who could hold on to their truth the longest. You stand with Thorkel in the heart of this conflict. Odin, the Allfather, approaches not as a glorious warrior, but as 1,000 versions of himself, each one a different lie he is told to maintain his power. He shows Thorkel a world where he is hailed as a god, a world where he rules over all the realms. But with it comes a heavy price, the complete and total loss of his mortal heart. Thor, the god of thunder, does not attack with his hammer, but with a torrent of guilt and shame, psychological onslaught of all the people Thorkel has ever failed, all the mistakes he has ever made. The gods were not fighting him. They were trying to dismantle him, to break him down into his constituent parts, and to destroy his unique dual nature. Thorkel, with his hammer of sorrow and the gift of Loki's lost laughter, did not fight back. He did not engage with their lies or their deceptions. Instead, he simply was. He was the embodiment of truth, and in a world where truth was a weapon, he was invincible. He used his hammer to show Odin his own reflection, a lonely old man who had sacrificed everything for a power that was built on a foundation of lies. He used the sorrow of his hammer to feel Thor's guilt, and with Loki's laughter, he showed Thor the simple, beautiful truth of a mortal's imperfect life. The gods were not defeated by force, but by a psychological truth they could no longer deny. A mainstream historical fact from ancient Greek mythology is the idea of hubris, a fatal flaw of pride that leads to a hero's downfall. But Thorkel's strength was not in his pride, but in his humility, in his acceptance of his own brokenness. The open question that remained was, now that the gods had faced their own truths, what would become of them? Would they remain gods in a world that no longer needed their lies? The last god standing was not a victor, but a new kind of deity forged from a profound truth. As the celestial battle raged, and the gods faced their own psychological wounds, they did not fall from the sky or turn to dust. Instead, they were transformed. The gods of the old world, built on a foundation of pretense and power, could not exist in a world of unvarnished truth. Odin's 1,000 lies collapsed, and he was revealed to be a simple, heartbroken man who had lost his family and his purpose. Thor's immense guilt and shame evaporated, and he was left as a humble warrior who simply wanted to protect his people. They were not gone. They were simply different, their divine nature replaced by a profound and beautiful humanity. They were no longer gods, but mortals, with a lifetime of memories of what it was to be a deity. You stand with Thorkel on the newly forged earth, and you can see it. The gods are now walking among men, not as rulers, but as guides, as storytellers. They do not have power, but they have wisdom and a newfound sense of empathy. A bizarre detail about this transformation was that, as the gods shed their divine forms, their memories did not vanish, but were imprinted on the world itself. The stories of their triumphs and their failures were not just myths, but were part of the very fabric of the cosmos, a living, breathing history for all to see. Thorkel, the being of three natures, was the last god standing. He was not a god in the traditional sense, but a bridge between the mortal and the divine. He was a being of a truth so profound that he could not be a ruler, but a guardian. He was a symbol of the great mending, a testament to the fact that broken things can be made new again, not by fixing them, but by embracing their brokenness. He was not a king, but a keeper of the peace, a shepherd of a new world built on empathy and a profound and terrifying truth. A mainstream historical fact is that many ancient mythologies, like those of Greece and Rome, tell of a time when the old gods fell and new ones rose. But in this myth, there was no replacement, just a transformation. The open question that remained was, now that the gods were mortal, what would happen to the world? Would it descend into chaos without the guidance of the deities? Or would a world of mortals, built on a foundation of empathy and truth, be a better world to live in? The mortal's choice was not a grand act of heroism, but a series of small while profound decisions that determined the world's fate. Thorkel stood on the precipice of a new era, a world without gods, as mortals knew them. He had a choice to make. He could use his immense three-natured power to become the new Allfather, to rule a world built on truth and empathy. The mortals, seeing his power and his wisdom, would surely follow him. And a new pantheon would be born, a pantheon of a single god. Or he could simply walk away to live a life as a mortal, to live and die, and to be a part of the beautiful, chaotic mess of the new world. A mainstream historical fact from ancient Norse culture is the belief that the gods would die at Ragnarok, only for a new generation of gods to rise. But Thorkel's choice was a subversion of this myth. He was not a new god rising from the ashes of the old. He was a being who had the power to become a god, but also the empathy to understand the beauty of being immortal. He had the knowledge of the past, the power of the present, and the wisdom to see the future. He knew that a world ruled by a single powerful being, even a benevolent one, was not a world of freedom. It was a world of a different kind of lie, a lie of perfect, divine order. A bizarre detail about this choice was that it was not a philosophical decision, but a psychological one. The world itself was waiting for him to choose. The unraveling sky, now a canvas of human emotion, would reflect his decision. If he chose to rule, the sky would become a single blinding light, a symbol of a new divine order. If he chose to walk away, the sky would become a gentle, starlit night, a symbol of a world that was free to choose its own destiny. Thorkel looked at the former gods, now mortals, walking among their people. He saw the wisdom in their eyes, the peace in their hearts. He saw his own mother Freydis, no longer a queen of a clan, but a simple woman who had the freedom to live and love and die as she pleased. He saw the beautiful, chaotic, and messy truth of the new world, and he made his choice. He put down his hammer, Clofi, and he simply walked away. He did not become a god. He became a mortal. But the open question that remained was, now that he had chosen the path of a mortal, what would happen to the world? Would it survive without a divine hand to guide it? The quiet aftermath was not the silence of a world without life, but the gentle hum of a world reborn. The unraveling sky, a canvas of human emotion and cosmic memory, settled into a new kind of celestial beauty. The stars were no longer just the sparks of primordial fire, but a living tapestry of the collective unconscious. The world was no longer a stage for the gods' dramas, but a garden for mortals to tend. Mainstream historical fact from ancient Norse culture is the Heimdallr, a horn that would signal the start of Ragnarok. But in this quiet aftermath there was no horn, just a profound, pervasive peace. You stand with Thorkel on a grassy hill overlooking a newly formed fjord. The air is crisp and clean, and the water is a mirror of the new sky. Thorkel is a simple man, a craftsman, and a storyteller. No immense sorrow, no cosmic laughter. He has only a mortal heart and a lifetime of stories to tell. He is the first of a new kind of hero, a hero who does not fight to conquer but to understand, a hero who does not seek power but peace. A bizarre detail about this new world was that the former gods, now mortals, would often visit Thorkel, not as a king but as a friend. They would sit by his fire, and they would tell him stories of a world that was a world of gods and heroes, a world of lies and pretense. And Thorkel, the mortal man, would listen. And he would weave their stories into a new kind of myth, a myth of a world where gods and mortals were not so different. The world survived without a divine hand to guide it, and it was a better world for it. It was a world of chaos and order, of sorrow and joy, of life and death. It was a world where mortals had the freedom to choose their own destiny, to make their own mistakes, and define their own truths. Now, the tale is told. The storm has passed, the waves have stilled, and the sun has risen on a new day. Thorkel's name is not in the sagas, not in the scrolls, but in the wind. You can hear it now, a soft, whispered secret carried on the salty breeze, a reminder that the greatest myths are not the ones we tell, but the ones we live. The story ends not with a bang, but with a breath, a quiet, profound sigh of relief. The world is at peace, and so are we.